Hello, hello. I made this short intro video for the Global ICM reading Pre-Columbian Mesoamerica and the Andes. This reading essentially focuses on two cultural hearths. In other words, two areas in the Americas, in North and South America, where we see the flourishing of the most vibrant civilizations, the development of the biggest empires, or the biggest concentration of peoples and political structures in the entire Western Hemisphere. And that is Mesoamerica. Mesoamerica refers to that area of Central America down to the Yucatan Peninsula, along the Gulf of Mexico, and into parts of the northern upper part of Central America. And the Andes, which is, of course, the Andes Mountains, which stretch along the western part of South America. The first part of this essay will look at Mesoamerica. The pre-classical era, 2000 to 300 BCE, we see the first flourishing of Mesoamerican civilization, and that's the Olmec. The Olmec civilization emerged on the southeast coast of present-day Mexico, and they were the first to develop large-scale agriculture, which meant they could grow a lot of maize and beans and squash to support a larger population. We also see the first monumental architecture, first cities, first urban spaces, first development of religion. By 900 BCE, those styles, those cultural styles, the architectural style, the art, the type of irrigation and food production had been diffused throughout Mesoamerica. Diffused means it had spread. Now, scholars don't know exactly how that happened, but it's clear that the Olmec, they were focused on that southeast coast, their society and culture had spread to broader Mesoamerica by 900 BCE. Next, the classical era, 200 to 900 CE. And it's here that we see civilizations expanding from that area that used to be the Olmec into the broader Mesoamerican area, Mexico, the Yucatan, into portions of present-day Guatemala. In this period, we see the development of this one of the most vibrant civilizations. It's a city with its own cultural style and architecture and art. It's called Teotihuacan. And Teotihuacan was this massive city, several 100,000 people. It was the sixth biggest city in the world at the time. And these huge pyramids, the biggest pyramids in the Western Hemisphere at the time. Broad plazas in the city, flourishing religion, places for the elites, the art, architecture, calendars, religion. Just south of that, basically the same time, 300 to 900 CE, are the Maya. They developed in the Yucatan and down into present day, the northern part of Central America. The Maya were highly developed, way developed mathematical system, very accurate calendar, dozens and dozens of city-states. This region encompassed over 5 million people, pyramids, temples. The Maya and Teotihuacan both decline at sort of the same time between the 8th and the 10th century. There's some theories about this. One theory is ecological collapse. There's simply too many people and the environment couldn't support, 5 million people or whatever. And another theory is that maybe internal dissension, civil war, fighting for leadership among some of the elites caused the decline. And so we see a lot of these urban centers in Teotihuacan is deserted by that time. The final period that historians put Mesoamerican civilization is called the post-classical period, 900 to the early 16th century, when the Spanish come in and defeat the Aztecs. Here, between the 10th and 12th century, we have the Toltec civilization, just north of Mexico City. We see the Toltecs, again, having monumental ceremonial centers, pyramids, architecture. They also were very advanced in working with metals and jewels, precious metals, textiles. They were, in some ways, a warlike people. They conquered and controlled their surrounding area. And then, of course, the Aztecs. The Aztecs, like the Inca we'll see in a minute, are a very young empire by the time the Spanish arrive and defeat them. They're what I call a rags to riches story. They're an empire that grows up just seemingly overnight in the big scheme of things. In about 100 years from the 1420s of the 1320s of the 1420s, the Aztecs sell themselves out as mercenaries to other elite groups. They build up their military prowess. They build this really impressive city at Tenochtitlan, which is on an island in the middle of Lake Texcoco, and they begin conquering people. They begin conquering this whole area, and they'll take over the whole Mesoamerican, the Valley of Mexico, and that whole central area of Mesoamerica. Then, of course, the Spanish will arrive, even though the Aztec Empire had not really reached its full development. The Spanish will come, and that's another story of that conquest. But that's one cultural hearth, Mesoamerica. The Andes is our second cultural hearth. Again, these are the mountains, which are much bigger than the Rockies, that stretch, the spine of the Andes stretch down the western part of South America. And then there's maps of all this in the Global Lyceum reading, if that'll help you visualize this stuff. In the Andes, there's two zones of settlement within the Andes cultural hearth. One is along the coast. So you have the Andes, and then there's this little strip between the mountains and the Pacific Ocean. And it's that little strip, which is really dry, and a lot of it's desert. But we'll see Andean civilization pop up at different times in that coastal strip, where they'll have to learn irrigation techniques in this very dry environment to grow crops and to support cities. And the second zone of development in the Andean cultural hearth is in the Andes itself. It's remarkable that Andean cultures will develop cities and agriculture thousands of feet up into the Andes Mountains, in these little microclimates, several thousand feet up. So there's these two areas, the coastal plains and up in the heights of the Andes, where we see two zones of development. Pre-classical period in the Andes, about 3200 BCE to 100 CE. And here's where we see Norte Chico. Norte Chico is one of the most ancient civilizations in the world. It's very, very old. And Norte Chico, this type of civilization, which is tied together with common culture and what scholars believe, common religious outlook and art, had peppered along the Supe River Valley, peppered a lot of urban development. Little city-states popped up there, and that's along the coast. Up in the mountains, beginning about 1000 BC, is the Chavin. The Chavin is another Andean civilization, not on the coast, but up in those microclimates at the heights of the Andes. The classical era, 100 to 900 CE. Along the coast, we have the Moche people in the northern part, the Nazca in the south. The Moche, what makes them stand out is that their pottery is remarkable. Very realistic human heads on animal bodies, an animal-based mythology. They, of course, built temples and pyramids, these ceremonial centers. The Nazca produced textiles, cotton clothing. And there's a really interesting image in the Global Lyceum reading called the Nazca lines. They would, you'd have to be way up in the sky and you kind of think about crop circles. If you get way up in the sky, you see these very geometrically precise circles. Well, the Nazca would create these images and pictures on that scale, just hundreds of feet across. If you go up in the air, you can see that it's an intricately drawn animal or something like that. But there's a great aerial picture of that in Global Lyceum. In the 5th century CE, the center of Andean civilization jumps up from the coasts up into the Andes themselves with the Tiwanaku people. They had an urban center near Lake Titicaca, which is near present-day Bolivia. The post-classical era stretches from 900 to 1535, so 900 until the Portuguese arrive the Spanish arrive and conquer the Inca. Beginning about the 10th century, Andean civilization then shifts back to the coast with the Sican culture on coastal Peru. They have urban development. They develop large-scale irrigation to produce masses of maize and beans and squash to support these urban centers. And then finally the Inca developing in the 14th century. And like the Aztec, the Inca are a rags to riches story, an empire seemingly built overnight in the large scheme of things within about 100 years. What the Inca will do that's unique, they will unify the entire Andean region under one culture. They will stitch together for the first time all those zones of development in the Andean cultural hearth, stitch it together in a mass empire for the very first time. And again, if you look at the map in Global Lyceum, you'll see that the Incan Empire is just remarkable. It's almost 3,500 miles, 3,500 miles from tip to tip, north to south. It encompassed 10 million subjects. The Inca rulers were able to subjugate 10 million people. The Inca elite spoke a language called Quechua, which is an official language, or a second official language in many South American countries. It's still spoken today. The Incan rulers divided their empire into 4 big regions, and they had this very tight bureaucratic structure to control, a very hands-on empire to control these 10 million people. Installing governors and sub-governors and provincial rulers at these all different levels of bureaucracy to maintain this massive empire and control 10 million people. One way they controlled it was to require their subjects to bring tribute to Cuzco, their capital city. Now, tribute could be food, it could be textiles, it could be precious metals, it could be jade, jaguar pelts, the feathers of exotic birds, other luxury items. But tribute was also called mita, and that meant labor. One of the responsibilities of the Incan subjects was to provide their labor, to build temples, to build roads, to work in agricultural estates. So mita was one way, instead of paying taxes, it is a tribute in kind. You're bringing things, or you're providing your labor. As with the Aztecs, the Incan Empire is not going to be fully developed once the Spanish arrive, which again is a fascinating what-if scenario. What if the Aztecs and the Inca were allowed to develop fully and the Spanish had not arrived? Imagine what could have been. But the Spanish arrival was fortuitous, in other words, lucky for the Spanish, because when they arrived, the Incan Empire is caught in a kind of civil war. There's two leaders vying for control to be the emperor, and this causes dissension within the Incan Empire. It's fractured, it's divided. It's much easier for Francisco Pizarro, the Spanish conquistador, to come in and exploit those divisions and conquer this once great empire. Hope this intro helps, and we'll see you next time.